Checking in, everybody. Thank you. I apologize for running a little bit late, and I appreciate everyone being on and having the opportunity to connect with you. I'm sorry that we have to do it over Zoom, but I am thankful that at least the technology is in place for us to connect. I am Mayor Cameron Smyth, and I do want to thank everyone for your interest in government, in particular local government. And I know that a lot of times the attention is really focused on what's happening in Washington, D.C. or possibly Sacramento. But the reality is the decisions that really impact the day-to-day lives of most people occurs not in Washington, D.C., not in Sacramento, but at your local city halls, your county boards of supervisors, or even your local school boards. And so taking the time to learn about our local government and how the structure works is going to give you all very much a leg up among some of your peers, so you have that understanding of how our community works. As you all know, as I do, our community has been through a number of trials in the last several months. Starting back in October with the tick fire, which resulted in the largest evacuation in our city's history, to the unspeakable shooting at Saugus High School, to the global pandemic, to the protests that we have all been, some of you may have even been participating in over the last week. And so this is a great time to learn about your local government and the different departments here at City Hall and how we do our best to meet the needs of our community. Today, I want to share some information about the history of our city. We were officially incorporated in December of 1987. It actually started back in the late 70s with an effort to form our own county, to actually break away from Los Angeles County and to create our own county called Canyon County. That was not successful, and so then the residents pivoted into creating our own city. Santa Clarita was the largest geographic incorporation in California's history, and an effort, the motivation behind it was, of course, to gain local control over the community's growth, our finances, local representation, and all of that led to our success. So please take a look at this upcoming video produced by SCV TV that gives you a little bit more history around the incorporation of the city.
Into a thriving metropolitan suburb, the Valley's residents yearned to control their own destiny. They wanted self-government. They wanted more local control over the way their tax dollars were spent and more influence over the issues that mattered most, like how the community's growth would be managed.
It was the people here having our own voice and our own representation.
We never had local control at our fingertips like we have today. We can decide what we do with the money that's earned here. We make the decisions, not the decision board downtown. I think that's a blessing because you can save money if you control the purse strings. You put it where you need it, not where other people choose it to go.
Los Angeles County government, over the hill and then some 40 miles away, had been providing local government for the Santa Clarita Valley since the communities of Newhall and Saugus were established in the 1800s. In the 1980s, many of the same volunteer activists who tried to form their own county took a new approach. They launched a city formation committee in 1985, planting the grassroots that would become the City of Santa Clarita. It was no slam dunk.
The original city was going to be 90 square miles, as I recall, and it got pared down to what, about 39?
Yeah, 39.4.
They conducted financial studies. They gathered public input. And the agency that sets government boundaries in Los Angeles County, the Local Agency Formation Commission, or LAFCO, took a hard look at those proposed boundaries.
Unfortunately, we needed the permission of the Local Agency Formation Commission to get on the ballot, and so that's what we had to do. We had to accept their boundaries or go another 10 or 15 years without any local government.
Over the 10 years leading up to incorporation, we could slowly see that Santa Clarita, a wonderful place, a wonderful valley with great ambiance, with great opportunities for the future, was losing its identity in the snarl of what Los Angeles called urban sprawl.
Major landowners with visions of large-scale housing tracts lobbied LAFCO to carve them out of the new city.
The developers didn't want any part of local control.
The property owners with land that was not yet developed.
Right.
They had it good under the county and didn't want a bunch of untested upstart locals deciding their fate. The new city would include, for the most part, only the already built or entitled portions of Saugus, Newhall, Canyon Country, and Valencia.
Richard Dixon, who was the CAO of Los Angeles County, described this very aptly as the largest newly incorporated city in the history of humankind.
I was especially privileged, and still am to this day, that we were able to create the biggest city ever created, particularly in California. And here we are.
After 2 years of wrangling and review, voters within the proposed new city were asked 3 questions in the election of November 3rd, 1987. 1.
And we were focusing on, should we be a city? And the people overwhelmingly wanted local government.
Nearly 70% said yes. 2. Should city council members serve by district or at large? The majority favored an at-large council. And 3. Who should be elected to the very first 5-member Santa Clarita City Council? 26 names appeared on the ballot. The top vote-getter was Howard Buck McKeon, a one-time school board member whose turn as the city's first mayor would launch him toward a political career that included 22 years serving in the U.S. House of Representatives. Joining McKeon on the first city council were bookstore owner Jan Haidt, Joanne Darcy, who worked as the SCV's field deputy to County Supervisor Michael Antonovich, Carl Boyer, a high school teacher who chaired the City Formation Committee, and Dennis Coons, a retired firefighter. They had their work cut out for them. Voters had created a brand new city with no city hall, no staff, and a lot of pent-up demand for a more local government. The grassroots had been planted, and now it was time for them to be nurtured and molded into something completely new.
I appreciate if you saw that history, and I feel like I have to give a little bit of an anecdote that isn't in the video, but the city's very first council meeting was held at College of the Canyons at their gym, and it was actually my father who was the very first person to share that the city had officially been formed and confirmed and called the very first city council meeting to order. And so I have a lot of history and love for this community going back all the way to its formation. But we've grown tremendously in the last 30 plus years. We now have over 800 employees, 6 departments, and we are currently the 3rd largest city in Los Angeles County. And as you can see, you may not be able to see, but right now I'm actually speaking from the council chambers. And here is where we host all of our meetings, and we vote on the policies and programs and issues that are relevant and pertaining to our community at large. As the video attested, we have a 5 council member system, all voted at large. We have 4 council members and the mayor. So now let's take a look at the origins of the Santa Clarita City Council. Again, I've already probably provided a little bit of that insight, but let's roll the next section of the video.
When voters created the City of Santa Clarita in 1987, they also elected the first City Council: Howard Buck McKeon, Jan Haidt, Joanne Darcy, Carl Boyer, and Dennis Coons. In order to avoid having elections for an all-new council every 4 years, and for the sake of continuity, the top two vote-getters, McKeon and Height, were elected to terms of just over 4 years. The others had initial terms of just 2 years and 4 months. Regular 4-year terms for everyone started in the next election in April 1990. In that election, Darcy and Boyer were re-elected, but Kuntz lost his seat to Jill Klajic, an environmental activist who had worked as staff to the City Formation Committee and later for the city. Santa Clarita's next election came in 1992. McKeon bowed out to make what proved to be a successful bid for Congress. Elected to replace him on the city council was George Pedersen, a retired sheriff's captain. Meanwhile, Height won a second 4-year term. There was a bit of a shuffle in 1994 when Clyde Smyth, the popular retired superintendent of the Hart School District, edged out Klajic when she came up for re-election. Smyth, the father of Cameron Smyth, joined third-termers Boyer and Darcy at the council dais. Klajic would make a comeback. In 1996, Pedersen, our earthquake mayor from 1994, decided not to seek a second term, opening the door for Klajic to return from a 2-year absence. Thus, even with a few new faces in between, 3 of the original 5 city council members continued to guide Santa Clarita into its second decade.
All right, thank you. And I'm glad that video did mention my dad, and even I got a little bit of a shout out in the history video, so I appreciate that. As I said, I was born and raised here in Santa Clarita. I attended all local schools, as you all are doing, and it is certainly my honor to serve as the mayor of this community. I look forward to continuing this role and supporting our community as we continue to change and grow, and to ensure that the decisions we make here at City Hall are reflective of the community that we have now today. Because Santa Clarita is a changing community. We are much more diverse than we were back in 1987, and it's important that the decisions we make and the policies we put in place are reflective of that diversity. And I'm excited to be part of leading that effort going into this term. And so with that, I think I'm happy to turn it over to take some questions. If you do have questions, go ahead and raise your hand, and our communications team that are running the call will get you, and I'll do the best I can to answer the question. So if you have them, go ahead and raise your hand. Were there any questions that were asked in advance that we might have?
Yes, there were some questions that were already asked in advance. The first one is, what inspired you to get involved in local government?
I will tell you that I am one of those people that got involved later in life. Well, later in life. Let me rephrase that. The last time I was ever involved in government, if you will, was in 8th grade. I was on the Placerita ASB. I ran for freshman class president at Hart High School, and I was unsuccessful in that attempt. I still know who beat me and by how many votes. And she actually still lives here in Santa Clarita, and I think I put a yard sign in her yard several years ago. But it was not anything that I grew up intending. So those of you that are participating in this, you're way ahead of where I was. But I always had the influence of my father, who was very heavily involved, as you saw by the video, first as the superintendent of the Hart School District, and then after he retired, I came and did a term on the city council. And that's really where I got started. I had graduated from college, had come back home, didn't have a job, and my dad was running for city council, so I jumped on his campaign efforts. And from there, it seemed to just kind of move from that point. And I ended up first being elected to the city council in 2000, was reelected in 2004, then moved to the state legislature from 2006 to 2012, and then came back to City Hall 4 years later in 2016, where I served as mayor in 2017 as well as this year. So I'm a big believer that if you keep the door open and you are willing to see what is presented before you, that is a good way to find your pathway, because I never would have participated in the youth in government. I never thought I would be in elected office. And when I left the state legislature in 2012, I never thought I'd be coming back to local government either. But that is what the doors have opened and the circumstances has provided them. So always be open for that.
Thank you, Mayor Smyth. The next question is, what is the most challenging part of being the mayor of Santa Clarita?
You know, I had an answer for that I would give all the time, but that changed on March 13th when the nation in Santa Clarita effectively shut down. And so I think the most difficult part still kind of remains the same as it was before, and that is telling people no. That's not my nature, but the reality is we can't do everything here at City Hall. And a good example was as the pandemic hit and rolled through our community, and the decision was made by the governor and the county health officer that businesses, schools, government buildings, that we had effectively a nationwide shutdown. Well, after, as you can imagine, after a few weeks or even months of that, people wanted to open up and they wanted to get their businesses back. They wanted parks to reopen, but I wasn't able to do that. And telling people, I'm sorry that we don't have the authority or the data doesn't allow us to do that is very difficult. And people are not, particularly when you're telling them that you can't reopen your business, which is how they provide a living for themselves and their family. It is very difficult. But we were elected, I was elected to make the best decisions for the community based on the data that I have, and to do what I think is right, and that's not always easy. But as long as you know that going in, you can be okay. But I certainly don't think any local government or any elected official at any level has expected or could prepare for what's happened throughout the nation over the last 3 months.
Okay, another question that we've received is, what do you love most about Santa Clarita?
The people, honestly. And I know that we've gone through some difficult times recently with protests and community feeling, members of our community feeling that their voices haven't been heard, feeling marginalized, feeling ignored. And that's something that I am working to change. I was a little bit late to this meeting because I was meeting with a group of those who helped organize some of the protests and participated in the protests over the last several weeks. And it was important to be able to sit down and start working towards solutions. And so even in spite of the frustration and the anger and the disappointment that some people feel, there is still the desire to find a solution. And that's what is encouraging to me. Even in the most difficult times of the pandemic, We heard story after story of residents taking care of one another, volunteering, continuing to serve, even if their own companies were shut down. Many of you may have seen signs throughout the city of varying, encouraging signs about supporting our healthcare workers, supporting our residents, or just being positive. Those signs were done by a business owner here who had to shut down and was no longer working, but used his own money and cared about the community so much that he would create these signs and put them up all over the city just because he loved Santa Clarita and wanted to encourage us. And so it still comes down to the people. Even though we don't agree on everything, even though there's going to be challenges, the people of Santa Clarita really, first and foremost, want to take care of one another and care about this community.
Thank you, Mayor Smyth. The last question is, does the City of Santa Clarita offer internships or job shadowing programs?
We do. This year, unfortunately, is a little bit difficult because of the pandemic. We have had to roll back a little bit on all of our staffing. The City Hall was closed for well over a month, and then we began to bring staff back at a kind of a staggered pace, going half staff for a while, and now we're back up to speed. And so I think whether you have an interest in our communications or planning or building and development, I would encourage you to still reach out to see, but I know that this year's probably going to be a little bit more difficult because of all the protocols that remain in place along the pandemic.
Mayor, I have a question for you. For our young students who might be considering a career in government, what qualities do you think it takes to become a mayor?
So I would say this, first of all, if you have a desire to serve and you have a heart to serve, I encourage you to follow that. There are many ways to serve and to be involved in politics or public policy without being in public office, without being elected. I started working as a staff member, and I worked for, actually my very first internship was with Congressman Buck McKeon's office. And then I transitioned to working for state legislators. And it was there where I figured out whether I wanted to actually hold public office or not. But you have to be willing to sacrifice. You have to be willing, honestly, to be a little bit selfish. I have 3 kids that I mentioned, and this job takes away my time from them, time from my my wife, and we probably don't do as much as we should as a family. And so I think you have to acknowledge that and know that that is part of it. There has to be a sacrifice. But the lastly, I think, is you have to be willing and to have a moral compass, and you have to have a belief system. I can tell you, when I was in the state legislature, I served with Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor and Jerry Brown was the governor. And while politically I may have lined up more with Governor Schwarzenegger, unfortunately, he did not seem to have as clear of a set of policies and guidelines that drove him, and he would change from position to position very quickly. Whereas Governor Brown, again, may have not have seen to on the face of it where he and I would line up together. But Governor Brown had a very clear belief system. And if yours lined up with his on certain issues, you could count on that and work together. And that's all I ask. And that's what I try to present to the residents, that I will always be open. I will always hear what you have to say. I may not agree with you, but you'll always know where I stand. And that is what guides in my direction. And the beauty of our system is every 4 years, I am up for public review. So this year in November, the people of Santa Clarita will have the opportunity to look back at the work I've done over the last 4 years. And if they think it's a job that I've done a good job and they want to see me go back, I'll have that opportunity. But if they think it's time to go in another direction, they'll make that decision too. And whatever the voters decide, I'm okay with that. And I think you have to have that in your system to help guide you, because you're never going to make everybody happy. And you have to understand that. And you just have to make the decisions that you think are the best at the right time with the information you have.
Thank you, Mayor Smyth. That wraps up our session for today. I just want to thank you, Mayor, for your time, and I want to thank all the participants who attended this Zoom. Please remember to email me for the next code for July 10th. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.